Good morning, Kathleen.
Good morning, Young.
Good to see you again.
Yes, thanks for coming to Factory Berlin.
Yeah, it's been my third time, I believe.
That's
I've
right.
been visiting. I believe this used to be a beer place.
No, that's the other location.
Oh, that's the other location.
Yeah, this was originally actually an AGFA factory.
Uh-huh.
So it's an interesting metaphor for a company that was focused on analog film and that missed the boat to digitization and the digital economy. And here we are and are really representing that digital economy.
So if you miss the boat, then you become something else.
Yes.
That's the lesson for entrepreneurs.
That's the lesson for entrepreneurs. Keep on your toes.
That's great. I think, Catherine, it'll be great to give a little bit of a background around Factory Berlin because a lot of audience that are listening to the Next Wave series may not know much about Factory Berlin.
Well, Factory Berlin was started in 2014, essentially because our founder, who was an active or is an active angel investor, wanted to place his early startup investments into an environment where they could get access to investors, to clients, to other talents, and also at the same time had companies like Uber and Twitter and SoundCloud take space in the original building in Mitte. And that brought a lot of visibility immediately to the startup scene and to Berlin in general because of those brand names, those big tech companies. Coming in from abroad and setting up here. But we moved and realized and evolved over time, just as the startup scene has evolved, and realized that what is really valuable and needed is the connectivity between all the different partners and stakeholders. So we moved from a classical real estate and co-working model perhaps to something that is much more curated and community-oriented. So our process is that we have an application and people that want to be part of this community have to really provide the intel of what it is that they're going to give back into the community, why this community is valuable to them, and then we can really decide how these different individuals can benefit from each other. So as you said, now we're at over 3,500 individual members, and those consist of anyone from a 12-year-old student here at the new school to someone over 60 from one of our corporate partners, and everything in between. Very diverse, from over 70 different nationalities, and the whole point is to bring them together and provide this environment where co-creation can happen, and basically designing what the future can look like.
Excellent. So really it's an interesting model of how you fostering the ecosystem to work together and helping them to accelerate their process.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are, because my understanding is that you have a very multinational background with living in multiple continents. So if you can give some background and how you got to where you are would be really interesting for the audience.
Sure. I was born in Germany to a German mother and a French father, and they immigrated to Canada when I was very young. And I grew up in beautifully diverse and multicultural Canada and was exposed to different ways of thought. And I think that living and being in different environments and being able to meet new people created this thirst for knowledge and sense of curiosity that I still have today. So it's allowed me to push myself consistently out of my comfort zone, and made me take, dramatic career decisions that probably weren't the typical path that someone would take. But I always wanted to push myself and to surround myself in an environment where I had to adapt and learn, and then hopefully bring people along with me.
Mm-hmm. What are some of, as you are pushing yourself in changing, what are some of the biggest changes you made in terms of job changes or directional changes that you have to make?
Well, I gave up a very secure corporate job when I was working in Munich and joined a scaling startup here in Berlin in 2006, when this whole startup scene didn't really exist. There were very few young companies. And I moved here. I kind of left everything behind in Munich and wanted to join this because I was so fascinated by the energy of Berlin, by the energy of this company. It was also extremely international, had Canadian investors, a Canadian team, an outpost in the US, and then we were building essentially the international hub here out of Berlin. So that was, just identifying an opportunity and jumping in head first without knowing what the outcome was. And then I think another dramatic shift was moving out of that after the company was sold and going to work back in Canada in my hometown at the University of Waterloo.
So you were clearly a risk taker, which is the hallmark of entrepreneur. So tell us a little bit about Berlin back then, in early stage of a startup community. What was it like back then, and how is it today?
I would say there wasn't a startup community back then. I mean, there were individual companies, mostly that had kind of a creative tech background that were starting up, Native Instruments, and others, as well as ours back in the day. But you didn't have this buzz and this vibe and this sense of Berlin being the center of the European startup scene, which you certainly have today. It was a great environment because it was very rough still, and you had the feeling that you could form something and become something here in the city. But it didn't have that same type of international visibility as it does today. But
let me go back to your Waterloo comment, because I think you also spend a lot of time there. And obviously Waterloo is known for some of its great companies that came out of there, like BlackBerry and others. But before we talk about that subject, let's just talk about Waterloo as a community for startups, which is one of the major tech center, and particularly in AI and data in Canada. When you compare to Waterloo and maybe Silicon Valley or Berlin, how do you compare and contrast?
Waterloo has exceptional talent. So it has three outstanding academic institutions. And so we know that when you have outstanding academic institutions, that talent attracts industry. And certainly Waterloo has managed to attract big international companies to the region, but it also has a spirit of entrepreneurialism. It used to be in the manufacturing industry, and over time that changed from being a very automotive-focused environment to now being a tech environment. And that's really thanks to the university and the University of Waterloo, which has policies that are super, that incentivize entrepreneurship essentially. So if you have an inventor-owned IP policy, of course you're going to attract researchers and students and professors from across the globe that have that spirit of wanting to start something with their ideas and their research. And one of his alumni, he didn't graduate, is Mike Lazaridis, one of the founders of BlackBerry. And in that day and age, BlackBerry came and it just exploded and brought so much visibility and wealth to the region and put it on the map when it comes to tech ecosystems. And over time, although BlackBerry failed because it was very engineering-led and enterprise-focused and maybe missed the boat a bit on the changing consumer needs in the market, it still has a huge impact and legacy on the region. So the people that left the company stayed there for the most part, and they reinvested into the region. It released engineering talent, senior level international talent back into the ecosystem. People became active angel investors, and so you see this second and now third wave of entrepreneurship. So I think that that's similar to the Valley in the sense that you have a constant cycle of innovation happening, because when one company rises and then falls, it releases a talent and money back into the system. Berlin is not as far along, actually, in that, because it is a newer startup ecosystem. So I think that while there are similarities with talent and being able to attract talent to scaling companies, and a lot of capital, of course, that kind of cycle is just starting here.
Yeah, it's really interesting and fascinating to see a place like Waterloo, which has great institutions, which I think is really a requirement to have any good tech community, because you really need the academic foundation.
Yeah.
And then risk-taking appetite. And BlackBerry particularly is a very interesting story. BlackBerry, we used to call it Crackberry, right?
Totally.
you cannot live with that thing, you know. It was the way people typed and communicate for text messaging. And for some time, you know, with Nokia and then BlackBerry was the tool for enterprise, particularly if you're bankers, if you're working for government, if you're working for even Samsung. We were using BlackBerries, quite a bit of communication. But it's really what happened with the transition to smartphone. BlackBerry didn't see it.
No.
And they were so happy with their business. I think in some ways they missed the wave, next wave, which was really the smart way. So let's talk a little bit about the changing a little bit, because I know one of your career also was helping minorities and particularly empowering women in tech industry. And as we know that it's rare to see entrepreneur led by women in the tech community today. If you look at even venture capital community, only about 15% would be women participating and others. So tell us about the how you feel about that today. How do you see it compared to when you were beginning your career maybe 15 years ago when you were in Berlin first time? And then where do you see it going?
I think there's a lot that needs to be done. The numbers are dire. You've mentioned them. In Germany, it's 15.7% of startups that are founded by women, or one person, a female team, and so we feel like we need to do something. And when you look at the surveys and the analysis that's been done, clearly there are two main problems. One is access to networks and finding the right people to propel you, and the second is access to capital, getting face time with VCs or other types of investors. And so I've wanted to really put a stake in the ground and say we as an organization and as a really strong ecosystem that has a fabulous network can help. And so we launched Stealth Mode, which is our program focused on female and female identifying founders earlier this year. And what it does is it brings 10 mentees together with 10 mentors. So it's very much tailor-made and match-make based on what their specific needs are. And then we have a pool of other supporters that help out with whatever it is that those mentees need to grow their ideas and to come to an MVP stage. We received over 207 applicants this time around, which is just incredible considering it's only 6 months old, and from a variety of backgrounds. A lot of big data that we ended up choosing in the end, and we recognize by doing this that there are many talented women with tech backgrounds out there, and they are looking for this type of program, this type of support structure. And so when we as an organization and me as a person can say, okay, I can find, or we can find the best match for you so that you get that VC face time, and at the same time can establish your company, that is inherently good for the ecosystem. It's good for this ecosystem, but it's good for the entire world. And essentially, even if these ventures do not make it, whatever they've learned during this process will stay with them, because it's not just about the actual product or services that they're trying to develop at this point in time. It's giving them access to this network, and that network, if they take care of it, will be relevant for them and helpful for them in the long run. And on the flip side, I'm incredibly motivated because I see so many people coming up to us now and saying, I want to be a mentor, I want to support this program, both men and women, who really see the need for change, and so are stepping up and are willing to give their valuable time. So it's really, it makes me really, really happy. We launched the second cohort this week. I see great potential for this program, and there are many more out there, and we need to have more and more. We need to provide this opportunity to minorities and to women, and really focus on making valuable programs that can help them move the needle.
That's really great. I'm so glad. Usually it's not about engineering. They do a great job and they know what they need to be done and they know the problem statement, but it's just the knowing when to ask, and how to ask
And how to pitch.
and who to ask.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And then not overly pitching it, but pitching it at the right level. So, yeah, I think the mentor with experience does help to pace it right. It's not a sprint, right? It's a marathon. What would be the advice you would give to female leaders and entrepreneurs for them to become more successful as you're going through the journey?
Well, I think the one main thing is to know yourself, know what you're good at, know what you want to achieve, and to pursue that really passionately. When you do that and you can gain the self-confidence, that will make you infinitely stronger. So focus on that and don't waste time comparing yourself to others, because that doesn't really get you anywhere.
That's a really good one. Know yourself and try to build confidence about who you are based on your strengths and your knowledge, not rather than try to be everybody's.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to be open and willing to learn and curious, but understanding who you are and how you can achieve what you want to achieve is really important.
Yeah, that's a good advice. Yeah, it's actually advice to everybody, isn't it?
It is. It's not gender focused. I just think that there's more doubt that's put into girls' minds and
more
women's
confidence,
minds.
right?
And so I always encourage women to be more confident and step into that space and do great things and talk about it. It's about visibility. It's about having role models. And if we have more female role models out there, then we'll hopefully incentivize more women to step up into leadership roles or into entrepreneurship roles.
You know, it's what made Silicon Valley or Waterloo or Berlin the way they are. Success bring more success.
Absolutely.
So we just need more successful leaders.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That'll attract more people.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Success attracts success. I did want to ask you a question as well, because we have been speaking a lot about trends and trends that have passed. What kind of trends excite you now? What are you looking at?
Being in technology, I see the technology can really help a lot of in ways the way we communicate, the way, for instance, Zoom as an example. I think that helped a lot. It's one of the companies that I was involved personally, very early stage. And people could say it's a video communication tool, but it really is a way to cross the distance. And it wouldn't take away the personal relationship that you need to have. But at the same time, it really does include a lot of people that you may not be able to have a regular communications. I also think that AI and quantum compute are going to become very important. I believe that technology will make it to know more about what's going on. For instance, security. Today, how many passwords do you have?
I don't know, but I'm constantly forgetting them.
Too many, right? Yes. And how many same passwords do you use?
Oh, yeah, well.
You know, so this is not just your problem. This is the typical problem for all of us. So there is other way of solving the same problem, and one of them is really about behavior information. So based on how you talk, based on how you look, based on how you type, based on how you speak, it should recognize it's you and being able to open or lock. And I think that is what's going to change the interaction, because there's no way we can remember all the passwords they're imposing on us. So the identity management equals based on who you are. And eventually, if we can match, that's the true identity. Until then, we're creating pseudo-identity, and we're creating pseudo-password and pseudo-representation of you, which can be easily copied. So that's another example of how the amalgamation of technology that can give you much better insight about behavior, because to get to behavior, you need to understand really true IoT. You know, the way we do things, the way we watch things, the way we act, the way we respond. And you have to get all the data, and then using AI to sort that out equals you. And that is the behavior side of it. We're not there yet. I also think digital health can be really exciting. I really believe that we can know so much about our body before you have issues. So preventive rather than reactive health care will reduce the cost of care why do you have to see a doctor when you're sick when you can have an early warning system? So the key question is, can we use technology and biology combined? Can we create an early warning system that can give us a better insight of our body?
When you talk, I mean, it sounds like a really bright future. We're not going to have to remember our passwords. Our lives will be much more efficient, and theoretically we'll be healthier. So that would free up more time for us to be creative humans, to be communicative humans. I hope that we really become that we take advantage of all those efficiencies and advances in technology, and actually get back to becoming human and having that human connectivity. Because here at Factory Berlin, we've been operating through the pandemic at a reduced capacity, of course, and then starting to scale as we can, because we have seen that our community members, especially the freelancers and the early stage startups that need this environment, the so-called third space, not the home environment, not the workplace, but this type of ecosystem and network where you feed off of each other and where serendipity takes place, the effect of having the water cooler conversation, which you can't have when you're on a video call. And so we've seen our community want to flock back to the space because they feel that need to have the human interaction, because actually, some things just happen serendipitously, or co-creation happens when you have the room for that invention.
That is really good point. And we are social animals, and when you don't have that, there are certain things missing.
Yeah, and I mean values. We have companies, we've built companies over years, and we say you want to attract talent to your company because you represent something, you have certain values. And how do you uphold and maintain and live those values when everyone is remote? How do you have that stickiness to your company, to your brand? How do you create that if you have no surroundings and identifiers of what your company really represents?
Very good point. Yeah, excellent point to think about.
We'll see.
It is COVID-19 challenges.
Yes.
But it does highlight the real issues.
We dove into the deep end of the future of work experiment, a few months ago, and now we'll see how we swim.
Well, I know Factory Berlin has been providing a space and community for many of the entrepreneurs to stop in, and it really helped them to learn and share, and I think helping them to have a common journey through this ecosystem. So I appreciate you doing it. And thanks for spending time with me today.
Well, thank you for coming.
Okay, great.